Transgender swimmers Leah Thomas and Isaac Henning had the top 2 times in the 800 freestyle at last week's Ivy League Swimming and Diving Championships. And Leah Thomas, who was born male but now identifies as female, went on to smash several records in winning gold in multiple events. I'm joined by Save Women's Sport co-founder Katherine Deves. Katherine, we have a biological male here who was a mediocre swimmer in the men's competition but has now transitioned and identifies as a woman and is smashing records in the Ivy League in the women's competition. I've got to ask, why are the female competitors putting up with this?
Well, look, they are putting up with it because of threat of sanction. They have been told that if they speak out, they could potentially lose scholarships or they could lose career opportunities. So they are afraid.
I can understand that, and if one of them or 2 of them spoke out, they would be maligned as bigots and attacked. But if they all in unison said, this is manifestly unfair, we're not going to compete against someone who has this sort of advantage, biological advantage, then perhaps that could force change. I just think at some point that the female competitors have to take a stand. Your local MP is Zali Steggall, and say what you want about her politics. I know you want to challenge her in the upcoming election, but she was a successful athlete, very successful. What have you made about her silence on transgender issues in sport, especially when she said this about performance-enhancing drugs back in 2020?
But it was really interesting over the course of my career, from in 1994 having to do a gender test to prove my gender to be permitted to compete as a female at the Winter Olympics, to then having to undertake a number of doping tests. I'm probably one of the very few in this chamber, I would say, that has had to undertake a doping test. These are so important, and it is important that the international community has come together with these legislations, with the wider code, to ensure that we have clean sport.
Katherine, are you surprised someone who was personally involved at an elite level and had to undergo those tests to prove she was female has been silent about this issue? Because it is very much a growing issue in women's sport.
Well, it's very disappointing and very hypocritical, because we have Steggall here who has enjoyed significant recognition and extraordinary personal success because of her sporting achievements, and yet she's radio silent on preserving those same opportunities for future generations of women and girls. And, you know, further to the hypocrisy, when she's standing there talking about doping and was actually on the tribunal for the Pyeongchang Olympics in 2018, where 200 athletes were found to be doping. And she talks about the unfairness of that. And in doping, we understand that there is about an 8% performance advantage. But when we have men and boys competing against girls, they have anywhere from an advantage of 10% in speed all the way through to 260% in punching power. So for a woman who's benefited from sporting policies but isn't prepared to, hasn't spoken out in defence of women and girls coming behind her, I really do find it very disappointing and very hypocritical.
It is disappointing because we need the former female athletes to speak out as well as the current ones, and someone like Zali Steggall has a massive platform. And finally, I want to just ask you about this New York Times ad. It's come under criticism rightly because it's all about really maligning JK Rowling. The poster reads, imagining Harry Potter without its creator. I mean, JK Rowling is just copying such ongoing abuse for speaking out for women and women's rights. And I don't know, Katherine, to me, this is almost like a warning to other women to shut up and don't make the mistake JK Rowling did.
Well, the irony here is that with her 2 most recent children's books that aren't Harry Potter, they were actually New York Times bestsellers. So, I mean, to me, this is just an example of modern-day McCarthyism, and it feeds into that broader issue that we're having is when we're seeing, small L liberals and progressives, such as, the New York Times newspaper, presuming to cancel the world's most beloved children's author and divorce her from her legacy. And we look at this issue of, these progressives who have this orthodoxy of thought and are trying to impose this uniformity upon everyone. And it infringes upon our freedom of speech, freedom of belief, freedom of opinion. And I find it, deeply concerning. But, I did engage in a small act of rebellion.
I find it concerning too, Katherine.
Yes. Yeah,
I'm with you. I think it's quite sinister, the attacks against her. I mean, she can say if she's big enough, she can deal with it. But I think they serve as a warning to other women not to speak up about this very important issue. I appreciate that you've got the courage to do so. Thanks for joining me tonight, Katherine.